guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be doing my October Victober wrap-up. As many of you know, it was the Victorian Readathon all through October. Unfortunately, I did not read nearly as much as I hoped I would. That being said, I kind of knew it was really up in the air. I just wasn't completely sure how much work I'd end up having to do, and it ended up being quite a bit. And then when I had fall break, I didn't really have much time to read because I had a lot of plans for fall break, more than I usually do for my breaks. So anyway, didn't read as much as I wanted to, but I did at least complete 2 books and start 2 others. So I feel pretty good about it, and I know next year I should be able to do a little bit better because I'm changing my major. So a huge part of why I've struggled so much to read classics is because I'm reading classics in school. I've been reading classics in school for my major in English. However, I am now changing to biology as I just feel like my life is being surrounded by books and it's making it not as fun to read and write. So I'm trying to have a little more balance in my life. Anyway, let's just get right into the books. Starting with the audiobook I listened to this month, I listened to We Two by Gillian Gill. This is a nonfiction following Victoria and Albert, their relationship. It starts off with their childhoods, going on through them getting married, their lives together, a lot of the power dynamics as they are the royal family, as well as their relationship with their children, and it was really, really fascinating. I definitely find their relationship very, very interesting, which is why I picked this up, especially because they, as a family, really set a lot of standards for the people of the Victorian age. They were both very, very morally centered, and so they inspired their kingdom to be as well, whether or not people actually kept to those morals. It was very interesting to be able to see, because I've always found myself, when I learn a little bit about their relationship, found myself really drawn into Victoria primarily and really more sympathetic towards her. And really my experience so far has been like fictional adaptations of their relationship. But I've always just felt so much more sympathetic for Victoria, and I wasn't completely sure why until reading this book, just understanding that Victoria just had more of a, they were both very stubborn and very prideful, but I feel like Victoria definitely had more of a habit of humility, if that makes sense, where when they had disagreements, which always come up in marriage, she was willing to try to compromise or at least apologize for her mistakes, whereas Albert was very, very unwilling to admit that he had done wrong. Anyway, so that was a huge part of the book, and I found that absolutely fascinating. I felt like the author did a really good job of creating a narrative style while still getting a lot of information in there. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and the only reason it wasn't 5 stars is just, it wasn't a particularly artistic nonfiction book, which is kind of what I save my 5 stars for nonfiction, is the ones that really just have like an artistic quality to them. And while this one was really an easy read, easy to get into, the narrator for the audiobook was fabulous, it just wasn't quite to that level of artistic nonfiction that I give 5 stars to, if that makes sense. So it was really, really good. I highly recommend it if you're interested in Victoria and Albert, and it was fun to get a little bit of that little taste of reality in the Victorian period during the month of reading Victorian literature. So then the only book I completed that was not nonfiction, the only actual Victorian literature I completed, was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which I ended up giving about a 4.25 out of 5 stars. I really, really, really loved this book. In this book we follow this man by the name of Walter Hartright, who ends up meeting on the road one night this woman who is dressed completely in white, and it's a very strange encounter. The next day after this, he is planning on going to this country estate to be a art tutor for these women. This house ends up being connected to the woman in white as well, and so all this drama stems from that, and he ends up following the story of this woman in white, discovering who she is and what her connection to this house is. And it was really, really, really good. Definitely very creepy. There were a couple characters that were absolutely wonderful. Marion, for one, Marion Halcombe. I know she's very well loved by people who read this book, and I am joining that bandwagon because I loved her character so much. She reminds me a lot of Jo March in some ways. She's kind of like a more sophisticated version of Jo March, and she's just really fun to read about. In fact, I wish she was in it more because I feel like her character was so fascinating. Also, Count Fosco, who is one of the villains in this book. That's not really a spoiler because you kind of figured that out pretty early on, as soon as he's introduced, really. He was so creepy and he made me so uncomfortable, but it was in the best way. It was in a way that was like, he's supposed to do that, and for this kind of like domestic thriller mystery type novel, it was perfect for the villain to be that creepy. I thought the mystery was really well done. I felt like sometimes it felt a little dragged out, like it was just more scenes of like, well, something's going on for sure, but we still don't know what. So it was a little frustrating that way. Another problem I had with it was I felt like a lot of the like answers to the mysterious questions were a little underwhelming. Not all of them, some of them were great, but there were some plot twists and things that were kind of underwhelming. There's also, I felt like it was very convenient, a lot of it, just the idea that Walter Hartwright just seemed too good at figuring things out. Like, things would happen and he'd be like, oh, so I'm guessing this is the answer, and he end up being right, but like his theories and stuff never really made sense to me. I was like, I don't feel like that's where I would jump first. I could see how you got there, but I feel like my first impression of what just happened would be completely different from what yours is. It was just kind of a lot of leaps in his theories that end up being right, and it was just kind of weird, especially comparing that to the women who like never figured anything out. It was just kind of a little misogynist in that way of just like the women can't figure anything out, but the man can. Anyway, so that was a little annoying. I know that's part of the time period, so it didn't bother. That wasn't why I docked the 0.75 stars as much. That was mostly because of the convenience of a lot of things, as well as the underwhelming nature of some of the plot twists. But also, another thing that really bothered me in this book, and this is totally an opinion thing, but I did not like Laura. I felt like she was such a doormat, and she was literally there to just faint and be dramatic and make everybody be like, oh, I'm so worried about you. And I'm like, why? She's just so... she doesn't do anything. Like, and it's so interesting because at the beginning Walter talks about how he falls for her. Again, that's not really a spoiler because it happens right at the beginning. Anyway, he falls for her after these days of like teaching her art and like getting to know her and stuff, but you don't get to know her with him. And so to me, she was just a super flat, boring character. But he was like in love with her, and then he wasn't in love with Marion, who I found way more fascinating. And I feel like the only reason he wasn't into Marion and he was into Laura was because Marion wasn't as pretty as Laura. It was just a very shallow romance to me that I really did not like. That being said, I did do 4.25 stars, so that's a really good score. It was just because I really enjoyed reading it. I really thought it was just so much fun. I loved Marion. I loved Count Fosco. But those few things just really hindered my enjoyment and my final feelings at the end. So, alright, and then I'm going to briefly mention the two books that I've started. First of all, I am almost done with Wuthering Heights, so this will definitely be in my next wrap-up. I literally have just like 4 chapters or so. I'm not gonna go too deep into this because it will be in the next wrap-up, but let me just suffice it to say, I read this to see if it was still one of my favorites, and I really love it. Like, not just enjoy, I really love it. There's a lot I love about it, but I'm slightly disappointed on this reread. And yeah, so hopefully that will keep you curious for my wrap-up thoughts. Then I have been also working on Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy, which I'm about halfway through, and I am really, really enjoying this. I love that I feel like I've like read a good Hardy that I really liked, and then I read a Hardy I don't like as much, and then I read a Hardy I really like, and then a Hardy I don't like as much. So this is going back to one I really like. And the characters are so sweet, and again, I'm not going to go too deep into it because I'm only halfway through, so I don't know my final thoughts yet, obviously, but suffice it to say, I'm still really enjoying it. I nearly forgot to mention, I technically did not start this in October, but at the time I'm making this video, I've started it, so I'll just briefly mention that I'm reading it. That is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I am listening to this on audiobook, and really, really liking this as well so far, so hopefully that will continue as well, and I think that's it. It's a lot of Victorian literature that I've been reading, so I'm thinking after I finish Two on a Tower, I'm going to read a fantasy book, because I'm overwhelmed with Victorian literature right now. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below some books you read in October, whether you participated in Victober or not, as I would love to know, and I will talk to you next week. Bye!